Okay. Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. I am Andrea Sandmeyer. This September, I had the honour of being the first person elected as the President of the Métis Nation of Alberta under our new Constitution, the Otipemisiwak Métis Government Constitution. Otipemisiwak is the Cree name for the Métis people. It means the people who own themselves, the people who govern themselves. No sentiment could better capture the spirit of Bill C-53. It is a bill to recognize who we are as self-governing people. In September, MNA citizens elected new representatives under our new governance structure and constitution. We did this because we are a self-governing nation, and our signed agreements with the Government of Canada recognize that. Bill C-53 implements our agreements and protects them. It ensures our Métis governments are equipped to support our citizens. Self-government means that we decide for ourselves how to best support Métis in Alberta. We decide what our housing and health programs look like. We decide how to help prepare our young people with world-class education and training. We decide how to support our elders as they age. And we decide how to move forward together. Only through self-government will the voices of Métis people truly be heard. This is why Bill C-53 must be passed. Our Métis ancestors were determined to govern themselves and protect our traditions, values, and truth for generations to come. They fought back against Canadian expansionism and the fraudulent scrip system that dispossessed our families and communities of our lands. And they defended Métis identity, lands, our way of life, and our rights. Over generations, the Crown made promises to our ancestors. But those promises were quickly broken, and our rights were denied and ignored. Nevertheless, we persevered. We came together, held democratic elections, and built our self-government structures. Today, the Métis Nation of Alberta is a democratic Métis government that represents more than 61,000 registered citizens. We continue to come together to defend Métis rights and to advance our collective interests. And we have built a province-wide service delivery system to help meet the needs of our people. Yet, we have always struggled to have Canada recognize us for what we are, a Métis government. Passing this legislation will provide that recognition. It is reconciliation in action. This historic step forward is long overdue. Our Section 35 rights as Indigenous people are not a zero-sum game. The advancement of self-government and Section 35 rights of one nation does not come at the expense of any other Indigenous nation, and more importantly, the legislation expressly applies only to the MNA, MNO, and MNS. The legislation does not impact the rights of other Indigenous people, including other Métis. We know that when one nation advances, it sets the path for all of us to move forward. Passage of C-53 doesn't affect anyone else, but failing to pass C-53 will hurt Métis people and the advancement of Indigenous rights across the board. This is true for the Métis Nation today. We deserve to advance in reconciliation just like all other Indigenous people. Over the past 15 years, Parliament has passed all other Indigenous self-government implementation legislation with all-party cooperation. It is our hope and expectation that Bill C-53 will follow the same path. I want to thank Minister Miller for bringing this legislation forward and his successor, Minister Ananda Sangari, for continuing this critical work and relationship. Last November, over 15,000 Métis citizens in Alberta voted for self-government, and we adopted our Otipemisiwak Métis Government Constitution in the largest Indigenous ratification vote in Canadian history. At that moment, a new chapter began for the Métis Nation of Alberta. And with this legislation, a new chapter begins for Métis across Canada. Together, we can finally put an end to Canada's denial of Métis as a self-governing Indigenous people. Today, we are asking for your support in passing Bill C-53. Thank you.
Perfect timing. Thank you so much. We'll now go to Ms. Fro, and when you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Bon après-midi. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee members. My name is Margaret Fro, and I'm the democratically elected president of the Métis Nation of Ontario, or MNO. I will start by acknowledging that we're on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe, and say that for over 2 centuries, Métis communities in what is now Ontario, along with other Métis communities through the Métis Nation homeland, have stood up and asserted our peoplehood, our distinct collective identities, and our rights as Métis. Within Ontario, Métis petitioned at Penetanguishene as early as the 1830s to have their rights and interests recognized. In 1849, Métis from the Sault Ste. Marie region joined with Anishinaabe to push back against Crown mining licenses being issued in their shared territories, leading to the well-known Mica Bay Uprising. In 1875, the half-breeds of Rainy Lake and Rainy River asserted their rights and ultimately entered into an adhesion to Treaty 3. Métis living in locations such as Nipigon to Moose Factory to Mattawa petitioned as well. And these Métis assertions were met with Crown indifference, denial, and neglect. But our people have always persevered. We did not go away or simply disappear. It has been now more than 40 years since Section 35 of the Constitution was established, recognizing and affirming the Aboriginal and treaty rights of the Métis. For MNO, this year marks the 20th anniversary of the Supreme Court's landmark Powley decision, which remains foundational for Métis rights assertions right across the Métis Nation homeland. And the Sault Ste. Marie Métis community continues to be the only Métis community in Canada to have their rights recognized by the Supreme Court. Bill C-53 is about more than Canada finally recognizing in law that the MNO is a Métis government and that the Métis communities represented by the MNO hold the inherent rights of self-government and self-determination. It's also about improving the lives of Métis children, Métis families and communities in Ontario and right across the Métis Nation homeland. The inherent rights that this legislation enshrines are human rights. However, because of Canada's historic denial of the very existence of the Métis people and our communities, we've seen our people fall through the cracks and not enjoy the same quality of life as other Canadians. Canada's denial and neglect has resulted in our history and communities not being as well known. Bill C-53 begins to reverse this colonial legacy of denial. It's the foundation needed for real and meaningful steps forward on the path to reconciliation, and it will have positive and tangible impacts on our communities, on our people. This includes the ability for Métis governments to finally have a say over what happens to Métis babies and children, and also to create our own systems to take care of our families, something Indigenous people across Canada have been pursuing for decades. We will finally be able to design programs and services that meet the actual needs of our citizens. Bill C-53 enables us to make those choices, not the Crown. I want to emphasize that Bill C-53 applies only to the MNO, the MNA, and the MNS. Bill C-53 does not impact the rights of other Indigenous peoples in any way, including Ontario First Nations. I want to acknowledge that there have been concerns raised by some First Nations about this legislation and to reassure you that the MNO has been working hard to dispel the myths and the false information that's been spread about this bill. We ask this committee to ensure that it remains focused on what the bill actually does and says, not the myths or the rhetoric, the anti-Métis rhetoric being advanced by some. Similar to other Indigenous self-government legislation that Parliament has passed, Bill C-53 is only about matters that are internal to our Métis self-government, so that it's about our Métis citizenship. It's about Métis elections, Métis government internal operations, and Métis child and family services. It recognizes that no one other than our Métis citizens and communities should have a say over these internal self-government matters. Bill C-53 truly is reconciliation in action. It was co-developed with our governments and Canada, and it was introduced into Parliament with our full support. We do not seek any amendments or changes to the bill, and we ask that it be passed quickly by this committee, consistent with how other Indigenous self-government legislation has been considered. All we are asking is that Métis be respected and treated fairly and consistently by this committee, and that we be supported in our journey of self-determination and self-government. Reconciliation with all of Canada's Indigenous peoples is Parliament's goal. Now is the time for Parliament to take a clear step forward to achieve this goal, hand in hand with the Métis, and pass Bill C-53. Thank you. Merci. I welcome your questions.
Excellent, thank you. And now, Ms. Leclerc, we'll go to you for your 5 minutes. The floor is yours when you're ready to start.
Thank you. Tansy, Atlanite, and good afternoon. I'm Michelle Leclerc. I am the Vice President and Minister of Justice for the Métis Nation, Saskatchewan. And I'm honored to be here today to talk to you about Bill C-53. As a Métis leader, I know I am indebted to leaders that have come before me, and some of you know them. The late Jim Sinclair and the late Harry Daniels, among many others. Some of my earliest memories are of those leaders fighting for the recognition of our rights. 41 years ago, Section 35 included Métis, First Nations, and Inuit people. And one of those people that fought for those rights was Harry Daniels. They fought for the rights, for the right of recognition of our rights, our right to self-determination, our right to self-government, our right to raise our children, and our right to thrive as a nation, Métis Nation, Saskatchewan. Generation after generation, our leaders have sacrificed everything to get to this point, and our government will work tirelessly to see this through. Our Section 35 rights must be honored and recognized. As representatives of Canada around the table, you don't grant us those rights. These rights are inherent rights, and they're given to us by the Creator and by those ancestors who fought, and many died, to ensure that we had those rights. And it's the duty of the Crown to recognize and uphold them. For more than 150 years of colonialism and oppression, our communities were divided and scattered, and still our people remained strong and united. This is what many fail to grasp about Bill C-53. The Métis, of course, according to the Canadian Constitution under Section 35, are one of the Indigenous peoples. These three peoples have rights, and they always have. There is no hierarchy in rights under Section 35. And at rights and people, there's no hierarchies. You've got the First Nations, the Métis, and Inuit. We are all equal under the law. And Canada must recognize our rights and negotiate with each of us in good faith. This is your duty. Mine is to sit here and remind you of your duty. I also want to remind you that Section 35 is a full box of rights, and that it isn't up to other people to determine what those rights are. You don't get to pick our rights or choose rights that we get or other Aboriginal peoples get. These are inherent rights, and we all get the same recognition. We are all on the same footing. Legitimate rights holders should not be pitted up against one another. We would not tolerate it if it was attempted to do this with our First Nations and Inuit relations. All of you who represent Canada are bound to the honor of the Crown. It's your responsibility to build bridges, create opportunities for everyone to thrive, not to divide and conquer. To that end, we know First Nations in Ontario have voiced opposition to this legislation, and we acknowledge this. The MNS has consistently advocated for a process to defend the integrity of our nations. We have championed and advance to all Métis Nation governments an independent panel that will look at the root issue. This expert panel is our way, the Métis way, to address this in a responsible, transparent, and objective way. And I'm confident that the expert panel will shed some light on the concerns that Ontario First Nations have. And I'm hoping that the Chiefs of Ontario will attend and become part of that process and express their concerns at that panel. I also encourage Ontario First Nations to raise these issues with Canada during the treaty consultation process. All three treaties, MNA, MNO, MNS, will be negotiated independently. And it's there, through that process, that duty to consult will be triggered. And MNS is committed to ensuring all impacted parties are consulted. When we're negotiating our treaty, we assume that MNO and MNA will do the same. The treaty process is Canada's venue to hear these concerns. Ours is in our expert panel, and I encourage Ontario First Nations to utilize both fully. But the venue for these concerns is not here, not regarding Bill C-53. Our legislation doesn't trigger the duty to consult. It lays the path to treaty making and for Canada to finally recognize what we have always known. We have and will never stop defending our rights generation after generation. In this moment, I feel within me all the lessons that I've learned and every blood memory passed down to me from each of those leaders that I talked about earlier. And they prepared us for this moment. And I promise them and our people that I will never stop until our rights are recognized. Bill C-53 is your chance to build a lasting relationship, nation-to-nation relationship with Métis Nation Saskatchewan. We're ready for this. The question is, are you?